Hey Astro fans, yet another video. What's the occasion? Well, previously, last year in 2022, it was a busy year. Family, traveling, and more recently, nothing but clouds have inundated the area. I wanted this video to be part of the Jupiter video, but I felt I should break it off into a separate video. So here's my take on how I capture from start to finish and process Jupiter for this example. Feel free to leave comments and suggestions and hit that subscribe button down below if you like what you see. And all that's coming up next. So in doing this, I figure I'll do a start to finish, showing all the steps from capture to processing. Tonight is pretty good seeing, at least for the minute before the clouds roll in, and they were only minutes away. And Jupiter is showing up quite nicely. I've already got it fine-tuned, but we'll take a look at a few things here that are important. Starting here on, this is the 224 camera. It's generally recommended to have 62 and 99 for the red and blue values, although you can change this after the fact using Registax and balance it, but this kind of gets it right where it needs to be from the start. The defaults are a little bit less than 62 and 99. I have high speed on, and actually USB traffic got bumped up for some reason. That should be actually closer to 40. Yeah, right there, because occasionally it'll drop frames if you don't lower that. So I've found that if the seeing is good, the gain can come down. The unity gain is 375 on this camera. I have it at 303 when the seeing is good, and I did some test comparisons between higher gain, lower gain in the same conditions, and the lower gain typically 1 for good seeing. And trying to shoot for maximum frames per second. Now you could raise the gain and get higher frames per second or lower the exposure, but you don't want the histogram to dip below 50%. So 50 to 80 being the target range for the histogram. And the other thing is I'm using the Zwo Adc. Anything between say 20 degrees of altitude and 65, I believe, is the actual stat. And using this ADC tuner, I was able to move the knobs and level it out and get it pretty close to center for both circles. And generally with Jupiter, 180 seconds works just fine. You might do shorter exposures if you're doing an animation. I did an animation with 60-second exposures, capture times, duration, and the skip in between was about 45 seconds, the delay. But for most regular captures, 120 to 180 seconds, and then you can actually stack them again later after the fact in WinJupos and get an even sharper image if you do like 20 minutes worth of images. So that is the capture side, except for the focus part, which is the most tricky. And if we take a look here, I'll zoom out. I'm remotely connected through remote desktop here, as you can see. At least once you get things set up, you can actually remote desktop and do everything. The focus. So a couple of ways of doing this. One of them is to look at a moon of Jupiter and try to make it as close to a ball as possible. But before I throw things out of whack to demonstrate, I'm going to write down the position of the focuser, which is over here with the Rigel nStep that I have on the knob. You bring that up pretty high. In fact, I'm going to switch it to the 1 to 100 range, and you can get a good look. You can see at this point I have it fine-tuned to a small tight ball, which is great. Now if you were still out or in on the focus, you would see something like this. Bring it in tighter, gets tighter, We were at 167.54, or it's, yeah, now we're beyond that. So let's see. Now, once you are back to the regular exposure, you can use the focuser either manually with your hands, or if you have the electronic one, or a moonlight or something like that, that's even better. You can take it in and out and see if you can see more details on the planets in the clouds. So here's where we think we're at focus. Let's just go out a little bit. Yeah, we're losing some of the details, I think, and come back in. Go way in. Let's just go super far there. It's going out of focus. Somewhere right about there again. Really hard to judge, so you almost have to do maybe a 60-second and another 60-second, and in between them change your focus and see which one looks sharper. And the one thing I forgot to mention, that capturing Jupiter, getting it centered as a target, for me, I'm using a 290 mini, mini in a SV Bony, I think it's a 60 millimeter refractor on top for the guide camera. So here, using Nina, I initially align the stars, align the telescope, and bring it to where it should be, and then just poke around with the controls for a minute until I find Jupiter in the center, which usually isn't far from here. Of course, I could recenter the finder scope, the guide scope, but I haven't bothered because I kind of know where it is when it's in the center. And I also can look at the HFR, and I can see that we're down to 197, 199. The other night with really good seeing, it was right around here too, actually not quite that low, but we're a few minutes away from clouds appearing. In fact, I think actually that's probably why the HFR just went down. You can see some of the clouds starting to appear, high level clouds. So conditions right now aren't great, so I will use a previous capture for the demonstration of how to do the and the other thing is I use the guiding auto guide. You have to initialize the telescope interface first and choose your telescope, and then go to options, and you have to play with these numbers here. You have to play with these numbers to keep it in center. Usually 375 on both or 350 on both works, but lately the RA has been struggling, and I had to bump that one up on the correction time. But that works pretty well, so then you can go like this and create your ROI, smaller area, higher frame per second. So you'll go from 60 frames per second with this camera up to 155 or 200 even. And I usually re-click the auto guide button here, and it'll stay close to center. It could use some tweaks, but it's fine as long as it stays in the box. But that's auto guiding, that helps keep it there for long durations. Although technically you should probably check your focus between each capture, which that can take a minute in itself if you're doing a series of captures. Now I found that I do not have to lock the mirror on the SCT unless I'm slewing around a lot, or maybe after meridian flip, or before and after meridian flip, or just refocus before or after meridian flip. As long as you're not moving the scope a lot, you're not going to have mirror flop. And I'm at f16 right now, and that seems to be the optimal level for this telescope in the conditions here in southwest PA, with the jet stream and horrid conditions we have most of the time. And one other note is that in the settings down here, if we go down to observer, that's why you see altitude now, because you can specify your longitude and latitude here under observer, and then it will give you the correct altitude. You also want to make sure in the settings that you have WinJupos file naming enabled. That helps for WinJupos later on, or for other things, to see the UTC time. And you want to make sure under debayer that you have it set to debayer and capture color data. At any rate, I thought the clouds were making things worse, but it looks like there's still a little window of opportunity even right now to take another set of images here. Looking fantastic. I mean, that's pretty clear for where I'm at. Maybe not quite as clear as the other night, but I mean, when you can see the banding and different details right here in your preview window, you know you've got a good image, or will have a good image most likely. All right, there we go. Now the guiding is done, and the capturing is done, and we'll head over and do some processing. Okay, I've opened up Autostakkert, ready to do some post-processing here. And in Autostakkert, some settings to be aware of. Noise robust, 5 or 6. I generally prefer 5. I did not see a huge difference between 5 and 6, although I actually thought 5 looked a little better for some of my data. I actually thought that some of my data looked better at noise robust 5. I normalize the stack to about 80%. You can do whichever value you want, like 70, 80, 85. It'll make the brightness pretty much the same on all frames. RGB align is always checked off, and I like to use the free fields. In this case, I was at F16 using the advanced Barlow. I lowered it to F16 to get a little bit sharper image, I think. And so everything's loaded in here. Now, I don't always do an analyze step. I generally find that 25% of the stack is usually where you want to be. That's how much data you want to include. And drizzling, that's only under perfect conditions would you maybe want to drizzle to 1.5 times. You have to have good data for that. Now, for the AP size, I have it on replace and multi-scale. These are recommendations you'll find on the guides online. And the idea is to shoot for between 40 and 50 APs, alignment points, automatic points. So that's what I did. I placed them, ready to go. And let's just run the analysis and take a look at it first. All right, the analysis is done. And what you generally do is look at this ordered line here, this green line, and when it intersects the center line, that's about how much percentage you should use. So if this is 25%, then this is 50, 75, and 100. This is 25, so that's probably like 27% if you want to be technical, but I'm going to just leave it at 25. And for stack name options, I have open in Registax checked off, but I've run into problems where if you have Registax already open, it won't work to save it. You'll go to click save and Registax will then freeze up and you have to close it anyway. So keep that in mind. Right now I have Registax closed. I'll open it. I'll open a blank copy here in a minute as it does its stack. So now we just do the stack step, which can take a while. I should mention too that under the open box you can do multiple AVIs or SER files at a time. So if you're doing an animation of 60, you can select all 60, place your AP grid, and run the stack, and it'll just take half a day to go through all the images, or the video files I should say. Alright, here we are in Registax. And there's the look at things in its initial state. I do not use linked wavelets. That is a more advanced way of doing wavelets where it does a whole lot at once. So the slightest move on a slider and you'll be, so it's Gaussian, linear, and that's it here. So generally with Jupyter, the first 1 to 3 sliders is all you really need to work with. And just sliding this over should bring things into focus, and using the first 2 you can get a pretty good idea of whether you were in focus or not, or if you had clouds, thin clouds. So in the case of this image, it's not the greatest one, at least by first 2 sliders. But let's load up a scheme I had here. Not that one. See, this is an example of over-processed. Things just kind of blow up when you have this sort of a thing going on. That's what you don't want. So that was one of my previous experiments. Set it back here for a second. Probably try bumping this up a couple of notches. Bring that guy over, and then one thing to do, and you can see I'm getting some fringing here on the edges too, so it's already over sharpening. If we take a look at the zoomed area, you can get an idea of whether or not there's noise or not. You have to hold in the control key to move around. So we can denoise on the first layer, and that should bring the noise down. Now it's smoothed it out, as you can see. And then consequently we could maybe try taking up the second. You don't want to go much higher. Nope. Let's try the third slider. Maybe just a touch on the third slider, but not too much. So it doesn't look like there's too much noise, and that is probably as good as this image can get from within Registax as far as sharpening goes. Might even be a little too much sharpening still. The other thing to do would be to take the histogram and move the right slider over, and I'm going to clip off this edge and hit stretch. That'll brighten it up. And the same thing on the left side. Can bring this in over towards that dip and hit stretch. So you end up with that. And we have to do RGB balance. There we go. Things are more in line. A lot of people like to bump up the blue slightly. There's one notch on blue. That may be too much for my liking, but let's just back it down right there. And RGB align probably should do it. You take that square box and you fit it around the planet. I usually don't have any results from doing this, but we'll try it anyway. And just click estimate and wait for it to do its thing here, and it's done. So if it had found an adjustment, one of these values would have became like a 1 or a -1, that sort of thing. And that's about it. So then next step would be to hit do all. Always make sure you hit do all, and then save the image. And then after that, you could take it into Photoshop and try to enhance it slightly, or some other tool. Alright, here we are in Photoshop. And what I generally do is click adjustments right off the bat, go to vibrance, and just slightly bring that one up, because if you go too far, the right edges start to really look crazy. So you don't want noise added. So maybe like a +11, that's not much of a difference. And then the saturation, same deal, too much saturation and it will look grainy. So just a touch. So it adjusts on the fly here. That's only a +5. And we can view the difference, and barely a change there. So what I also then go to is the hue and saturation, and try to adjust the saturation from there. And now check it on versus off. Just a slight change. You can see it's a little bit more saturated. Not much, but some. And then I go up to filter and noise and despeckle, and then filter, sharpen, and the unsharp mask. And I've been using these settings here of 2.7, and if you just uncheck the preview, you can see it's just a slight change towards the sharper image. And that's probably all you really want. You don't want to go too crazy. Maybe let's try 42. That might be okay. I'll zoom in to see if you're getting more noise. Seems alright. So there you go. And that would be your final Photoshop image.